Okay, so today's video tutorial is on the beginnings of the Industrial Revolution. Some of this information will be familiar to you from the drawing activity that you've been doing over the last few days. At the end of this, you'll be able to describe the causes and effects of the Agricultural Revolution and describe the causes and effects of the Industrial Revolution. You're going to want to get your paper notebook out and put today's date and the heading Industrial Revolution in there. There's a few vocab words you're going to write down. One of the vocab words that you can write down, and you can pause this video and write this down now, is the Industrial Revolution. The definition for that is the period of greatly increased output of machine-made goods that began in England in the mid-1700s. As long as you have that definition down, you're good for now. Before the Industrial Revolution, everything was made by hand, as you see in this top picture. People made things at home, like with this spinning wheel. After the Industrial Revolution, workers and machinery were moved into factories, and everything was made in factories by machines. Oddly enough, the Agricultural Revolution is what kicked off the Industrial Revolution. And the Agricultural Revolution had to do with farming. Farmers started to experiment with new techniques for farming. The wealthy farmers started to buy up bigger tracts of land, and because they had more land, they felt like they could try new things. They used new tools and tried out new techniques. One of the new tools they had is pictured in the top right. It's called the seed drill. It improved the way they planted seeds. Before the seed drill, farmers used to just put seeds in the palm of their hand and throw them onto the dirt, which is called broadcast seeding, which really didn't work because if the wind blew, the seeds would blow away and birds would come and eat the seeds. So the seed drill actually planted them in these little ridges in the ground and made sure that they took root and didn't blow away. They also started selective breeding their livestock. So instead of, say you breed cows for meat and for milk, instead of breeding every single cow you have, even the sick and unhealthy and small ones, farmers started just breeding the really healthiest and strongest livestock. So they would reproduce only really healthy and really strong animals. They also started rotating their crops, which you see in this bottom picture here. Instead of planting the same crop in the same field year after year, they would rotate them into different fields. And this kept the nutrients in the soil really healthy, and it made a lot more crops grow. So the effect of all of these new techniques and inventions was the Agricultural Revolution, a revolution in farming or agriculture. Because of it, there was a lot more food. They were growing more, so food supply went up, which meant people were healthier. Living conditions improved because people are eating more, they're eating healthier, and they're living longer. And what ends up happening because of that is that England's population skyrockets. You can see in this chart to the left, over each 50 years, how much the population grows. And it really grows a lot. Starting in 1750, goes from 6.5 million to 9 million. But if you look at from 1800 to 1850, the population almost doubles, and that's a direct result of the Agricultural Revolution. Now, this is really what causes the Industrial Revolution, because there's so many more people. England needs to find a way to produce things faster. They can't just keep making goods like clothing and other things by hand, because it's not fast enough to meet the demand of this really new big population. The other link it has to starting the Industrial Revolution is because there's so many more people, there's a lot more workers to do this work. So here's another definition you can pause and write down. Industrialization is the process of developing machine production of goods. And another definition you can write down, I'm going to pause again, is the factors of production. These are the resources that are needed to industrialize, and they are land, labor, and capital. You want to make sure you have those three things down. Those are the three factors of production. So a country can't industrialize unless they have good land, natural resources and places for factories, a lot of people for labor, and capital, which is a fancy word for money. You might want to put a money sign next to the word capital. They need to have money to pay workers, to create inventions, to open up factories. All right, England was the first to industrialize for a couple reasons. One, they had to. Their population exploded, and they had to find a way to produce things faster. So they had that need and that demand. But they also had the factors of production. They had land. All right, they had a lot of natural resources. If you see here, this brown color are all the coal fields. All right, they had a lot of coal. They had a lot of rivers, which are kind of hard to see, but they run all throughout England, which supply water for transportation and for power. They had labor because of that big population boom, so they had a lot of people that could go work. And they had capital. They had a really developed banking system, which would actually loan people money. So if you had an idea for a new company or for a new invention, you could go to a bank and get a loan for it. Also, it's not a factor of production, but they were also at peace. They had no war, so they could really focus on industrializing because they didn't have to focus on anything else. The first industry to industrialize was textiles. Textiles is a fancy word for cloth. Again, this is because of the demand. They needed to find a way to clothe this new population of people. So people started creating new inventions to speed up the process to make cloth, which is done by spinning and weaving yarn. And here's a picture here of spinners and weavers in an old factory. You see them making the yarn right here, and then spinning it into cloth. So this is the first industry to industrialize, and you start to see new inventions, which to us seem pretty low-tech, but back in the day seemed pretty high-tech. The first was the flying shuttle, which you see pictured below. It basically speeds back and forth on a big loom, a big weaving loom, which you might have seen if you've ever been to Sturbridge Village or a place like that. It speeds back and forth on these little wheels that it has, and it doubles the work a weaver did in a day. So on this big loom, normally a weaver would have to weave in and out of every row by hand, but this little flying shuttle went back and forth on its own and greatly increased the speed of a weaver. The spinning jenny was another invention. Someone actually named it after their daughter. Because people were spinning yarn so much faster, the spinners had to keep up with the weavers. So the spinning jenny allowed one spinner to work 8 threads at once. So you can see this in the picture. These would all be spools of yarn that are being spun. So they can work a lot more and produce a lot more at one time. Then you start to see new sources of power. So a lot of those early machines were powered by hand. There'd be a crank, or people would be doing it by hand. The water frame was a machine that used water power from rivers to drive spinning wheels, so they didn't need to be worked by hand. You see a picture here. If you've ever been to an old mill and you've seen a building on the edge of a river and a big water wheel like this, that big water wheel goes up into the factory like you see here, and it actually spins using the force of the river. But when it spins, these gears are attached to gears in a machine, and it will power those machines. So this is the beginning of the factory system. So they moved the people that were doing all of their work from home into factories. So you now had workers and the machines in factories. But the early factories, if you remember from your drawing activity, were located near rivers for water as a power source. Not until the invention of steam could they be located anywhere. Entrepreneur is a word you might be familiar with. It's a person, and you're going to want to pause and write this definition down. A person who takes on the risk of a business. So an example of an entrepreneur is there was a man named Robert Bolton who was an entrepreneur and paid the inventor James Watt, who you may have heard of, a salary to just be at home and tinker and try and invent things. And eventually, James Watt makes the steam engine, which creates steam power. They put it on steamboats, they put it on locomotives, and they use it to power new machines so factories can be located anywhere. And steam leads to transportation improvements. Like we said, they put the steam engine on boats, and you had steamboats, which would travel down canals and increase shipments of goods. And you put the steam engine on wheels, and you have an early locomotive or train for a railroad. So you start to see railroads in the mid-1800s pop up all over England. So now people can sell their goods across a greater area. And this improvement helped shipping, but it also created a lot more jobs, especially in the railroad industry. Because during the mid-1800s they built so many railroads, people were employed building them and working them. And then you have a greater source of transportation for all the goods that are being produced in the factories. And that's the end.